All right, today is April 19, 2022. My name is Mario Guramo with BG Truck Enterprise. We're going to perform a outside pre-trip inspection for North Carolina. Every state is different to others. So the first thing you do, make sure the keys in your pocket and make sure nobody can start a truck while you're doing a pre-trip inspection. Overall, we look at the condition of the vehicle. Make sure it's not leaning to either side. Could be a suspension or flat tire. Also make sure there's no fresh puddles or oil. And we start from the top down. We're going to check the 3 ID and 2 clearance lights on the side, amber in color. The crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted. Next thing, we're going to check windshield wipers, the hood and grill. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted. Sometimes you can use a couple of components, name it, point it, and talk about it. You still get points. That way you save some time. Then we're going to have 2 mirrors. Make sure no crack, broke, damage, or missing bolts properly mounted. We're going to check the headlights, both sides. Make sure it's clear in color. No crack, broke, damage, missing bolts. No moisture in it. Then we're going to check the turn signals. Amber in color. No crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted. Has 2 functions: four-way flashers and turn signals. And we're going to check the bumper, make sure it's properly mounted, secure with bolts tight. And then last, we're going to check the plate, make sure no missing bolts properly mounted, secure, and it's valid up to date. Next, we're going to raise the hood, and we're checking the passenger side. Make sure you hold on to the hood since it's heavy and expensive. So let's walk up to the passenger side. This particular vehicle, we want to check overall condition, make sure there's no leaks, no missing bolts, and everything is good condition. We're going to start from the top down. We're going to check the pull-on level, make sure it's properly secured between add and full. Crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted, no leaks. Make sure the cap is present, secure it tight with the rubber seal, and then check the hoses and clamps, make sure there's no leaks. Next, we're going to check turbo. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted, and make sure there's no leaks due to the fact that there is oil and air running through it. The next thing we're going to check is the passenger side. So we're going to start from the top down. Mirror right, and properly secured and not missing bolts. Make sure the door open and close properly. Make sure the seal is properly attached. Make sure there's no leaks. We're gonna check the window opener. Make sure it goes up and down properly. And next we're gonna check the handle, bolts handle, and the steps. Make sure it supports the driver's weight. Make sure there's no grease, no oil. Okay. We're gonna close the door. And next we're gonna check the fuel tank area. Make sure it's properly secured. No crack, broke, damage. Make sure there's no leaks under. We're going to check the fuel cap, properly secure it tight with the safety chain and rubber seal around it. We're going to check the saddle straps, make sure there's got good rubber in between. While we're checking the turbo, you could have followed and check the exhaust system pipe. This is the elbow, and this is your muffler. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted, no leaks. Do not touch it, it will be hot. Next thing, we're going to check the driver's side. All right, we're going to check the driver's side under the hood. Overall condition, no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted, no missing parts. So we're going to start from the top down. We're going to check our coolant reservoir. Make sure it's between add and full. The cap is present, tight, secured, and with a good rubber seal. No leaks at the hoses, and the clamps are securely tight. Next thing, we're going to check our alternator. No crack, broke, missing bolts properly mounted, no fried wires, and a belt driven. That's how you get a point. Next thing, you're going to check your alternator belt. Make sure there's no more than 3/4 inch of play and no cuts, and properly mounted. The next thing, you're going to check your water pump. This is the pulley that the belt goes around it. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted, belt driven, and there's no leaks. Next thing, we're going to check is your air compressor. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. And then the holes are no crack, broke, damage, and there's no leaks. And it's a gear driven, and that's how you get a point. Next thing, we're gonna check the dipstick. We'll check it twice. We pull, wipe it off, stick it back in. Same procedure, pull, clean it, and make sure it's in the proper level. Next thing, we're going to check our steering system, our suspension system, our brake system. All right, and then we're gonna check the tire last. So we're gonna go to a steering system. We're gonna start with the steering arm, steering linkage. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. No more than 2 inches of a plate, and with the well lubricated universal joints. No missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing, we're gonna check the gearbox. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. No missing bolts, and then lines are tight, secure. There's no leaks. Next thing, we're going to check our pitman arm. Make sure there's no crack, broke, missing bolts, properly mounted, and with a good castle nut and safe and cutter key. Next, we're going to check is our drag link. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts, properly mounted, and secure with the castle nut and cutter key. Next thing we're going to check is upper and lower control arm. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, with good castle nut and cutter key. Last, we're going to check the tie rod, which is the long arm. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, with a good castle nut and cutter key. Next thing, we're going to check our suspension system. This is our spring mount. So you have one in the front and in the rear. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, no missing bolts, properly mounted. Next thing, we're going to check is leaf spring. Make sure there's no missing leaves, no play in between, and no missing parts, and not damaged. Next thing, we're going to check is a U-bolt. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, and tight with nuts. Next thing, we're going to check shock absorber. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. The bushings are properly mounted, and make sure there's no leak due to the compressed gas in it. All right, we're moving on to a brake system. We're gonna check our brake lines and hoses. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, tight the clamps, and no leaks. Next thing we're going to check is our brake chamber. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, and with a good C-clamp around it. Next thing going to check is a push rod, and then slack adjuster. Make sure a slack adjuster has 1 inch of a plate. Between 1 and 2 needs to be adjusted. More than 2 is out of service. Next thing we're going to check is the brake shoes, brake pads. Make sure that at least a 1/4 of an inch of thickness, no grease, no oil. And then inside, we're gonna check the brake drum. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, no discoloration, indicating overheating. And then make sure there's no grease or oil and no damage. All right, moving on to tires. We're gonna check with no ABC method, no abrasion, bruises, or cuts. Make sure the thread is no less than 432 inches. Then the pressure should be between 100 and 110 psi. Make sure there's no space between the rim and the tire, no leaks. Next, we're going to check our rim. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, no illegal welds, no crack, broke, damaged. Next thing we're going to check is lug nuts. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, and no discoloration around it or rust trail that it indicates looseness. Next thing, we're going to check our hub oil seal. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure. All the bolts are tight. The way we check it, we remove the cap, we stick the finger. If it's low on the oil, we add 90 weight gear oil and make sure it's in proper level. Next thing, we're gonna check the air valve. Make sure no missing cap. Right now it's present. Make sure there's no leaks. All right. Moving on to the driver part of the vehicle. So we're gonna start from the top down. Mirror brackets, properly mounted, secure. Make sure the bolts are tight. Next thing, we're gonna check the door. Make sure open and close properly. Make sure the window goes up and down properly. All right. Then we're gonna check the rubber seal. Make sure there is no indication of water or leaks. Next thing we're gonna check candles, both candles, and the steps. Make sure they're holding the driver's weight and there is no grease, oil, or ice. While at the driver part of the vehicle, I'm going to check my safety equipment. I'm going to start with the fire extinguisher. Make sure it's properly mounted and charged. 5 BC general freight, 10 BC is a hazmat, and properly secured. We're going to check 3 emergency triangles, which is on the passenger side, orange in color, and they can stand up to 50 miles an hour wind. Next thing, we're going to check our fuse box. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, and then there is no missing fuses, and we have extra 3 fuses if we need it. Next thing, we're going to check our inspection label of the tractor. Make sure it's up to date, and it is. And next thing we're going to check is our turn signal. Make sure it's amber in color, properly mounted, secure with a good rubber seal, no moisture in it. All right. Then we can close the door. And then next we're going to check the fuel tank area. Make sure properly mounted, secured. Make sure there's no any indication of leaks. We're going to check the fuel cap and make sure it's properly secured tight with the safety chain and rubber seal. Then we're going to check the saddle strap. Make sure there's a rubber in between the tank and the straps. At this point, we're going to continue with the rear of the tractor. So I'm going to start the top down. This is our working light. Make sure it's clear in color. No crack or damage, missing bolts properly mounted. We're going to check our air lines, electrical lines. We're going to start with the blue, which is service, a red, which is emergency, and then green, this is electric. Make sure the electric cable has 7 pins on both ends for the tractor and the trailer. Right at the airlines, this is our glad hands. Make sure the rubber seal between the glad hands and the trailer, the seal is in good condition, there is no leaks. Next thing, we're going to check our catwalk. Make sure it properly mounted, secured, no missing bolts, and then there is no grease, oil, ice. We're going to check our battery box. Make sure there's no crack, broken, damage, or missing bolts. We're going to check the terminals. Make sure there's no corrosion and there's no unusual smell. All right, we can continue with frame of chassis, frame of the tractor. Make sure there's no illegal holes or welds and no crack, broken, damaged, and no missing bolts. And we're gonna check the drive shaft, which is connects the differential and the transmission. Make sure the universal joints are well lubricated, in a good condition, no missing bolts, properly mounted. We're going to continue on with the tractor. We're going to be checking its suspension system, a brake system, and the tires. So with our suspension system, we have a spray mounts front and back. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, no missing bolts, properly mounted. We're gonna have the we're gonna check the lift spring. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, no missing lifts, and properly mounted. The next thing, we're gonna check the torsion bar, which is this part. Torsion bar. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts, properly mounted, secured. Next thing, we're gonna check the U-bolts. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, and then tied to the frame. And we look at the back. We're gonna check our shock absorber. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. The bushings are mounted to top down. Make sure there's no leaks due to the compressed gas in it. And lastly, we're gonna check our airbag. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. There's no leaks, and the airbag mounting is properly mounted, secured with bolts. All right. Next thing, we're gonna check our brake system. So we're gonna go in the front of the vehicle. We're gonna squat down. We're gonna check our hoses and lines. Make sure properly mounted, secure. There's no leak. We're gonna check our brake chamber, properly mounted, secure with a good C-clamp around it. And at the back of the chamber, we have a push rod slack adjuster. Make sure it's no more than 1 inch of a play. More than 1 and 2 needs to be adjusted. And then over 2 is out of service. Next thing, we're gonna check the brake shoes in the inside of the tire, at least a quarter of an inch of thickness. Make sure there's no grease or oil in between. And we're gonna check the brake drum. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, and then there's no discoloration indicating heat and rust. Next thing, we're gonna check tires, inner and outer tire. No ABC method, no abrasion, bruise, or cuts. No less than 2/33 thread of inch, and then the pressure should be between 100 and 110 psi. Also make sure there's no debris between the tires, and then make sure there is no space between the rims that indicates they're loose. All right, next thing, you're gonna check the inner and outer rim. Make sure there's no space between the tire and the rim. No illegal welds, properly mounted, secured. We're gonna check the lug nuts. Make sure properly mounted, secured, no discoloration or trail of rust that indicates looseness. Then we're gonna check our hub seal. Make sure the bolts are tight and secured and not missing. And the way we check it, we remove the cap, we stick the finger. If we need oil, we add 90 weighted gear oil. Make sure it's a proper level. Next thing, we're gonna check air valve. Make sure it's present, the cap is present, and there's no leaks. All right, we'll continue with the rear of the tractor. We're gonna check our mud flap. Make sure the bolts are tight, secured, and then make sure they're not hanging no more between 6 to 8 inches of the ground. At this point, we're going right under the trailer. Watch your heads. All right, so we're gonna start from the bottom up. We're gonna check our tractor tail lights due to the trailer tail lights. Tractor tail lights, red in color, properly mounted, secure with a good rubber seal, no moisture in it. It has a 4 function: park, brake, turn, four-way flasher. And we're gonna check our DOT tape if it's present. It is at this moment. And now we move into a coupling system. This is our 5th wheel platform. Make sure the bolts are tight and secure, no crack, broke, or damage. Next thing, we're gonna check our 5th wheel. Make sure there's no crack, broke, or damage. And we're gonna check our kingpin, which is inside the 5th wheel, and the locking jaws. Make sure they're in lock position, and they are at this moment. We're gonna check our trailer apron. Make sure there no crack, broke, or damage, and there's no space between the apron and the 5th wheel, well lubricated. Next thing, we're gonna check our cross members of the trailer. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, or missing bolts, properly mounted. And then we're gonna check our air lines. Red emergency, blue is service, black is electric. And make sure they're not hanging no more than 18 inches of the ground. So at this point, we're gonna come out of the vehicle. We're gonna check our release arm. This is our release arm. Make sure no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts, properly mounted, and it's in a safe position with a safety pin. All right, that can kind of concludes the coupling system. At this point, I'm done with the tractor, and I'm continue with the trailer. So we stand in front of the trailer. We're gonna check front of the frame, side of the frame. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts, properly mounted. No illegal welds, no missing bolts. We're gonna check our clearance lights. That indicates the width of the trailer. Make sure it's in good condition with a good rubber seal, amber in color, and it's working properly. Next thing, we're gonna check a trailer inspection label and make sure it's up to date, and it is. All right, we'll continue on with the side of the trailer. We're gonna check our DOT tape reflector, white and red crescent. Continue on. We're checking the landing gear. The handle is called handle or cradle, and make sure it has a 2 speeds, high and low. We're gonna check the cross members of the landing gear. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts, properly mounted. And we're gonna check 10 feet of the landing gear. Make sure it's free of debris. All right, continue on with the side of the trailer. DOT tape, white and red reflectors. Then we're gonna check, this is a turn signal. It has 3 functions. Make sure there's no crack, broke, damage. Properly mounted, amber in color with a good rubber seal. So the functions are turn, park, four-way flasher. All right, continue on with the side of the frame. Cross members. Make sure the frame or chassis doesn't have any illegal holes or welds. And this is our marker light that indicates that trailer is more than 30 feet long. It's an amber in color, good rubber seal, no moisture, and working properly with the three functions: park, turn, and four-way flasher. Okay, we're gonna continue on side of the frame. So we have trailer straps. Since we're using a flatbed, we have to check those, make sure they're properly mounted, secured. So we'll continue on with the trailer. We're gonna check front, rear axle. So we're gonna start with the suspension system, brake system, and then we're gonna check tires. So a suspension system, we have the spring mounts front and rear. This is our torsion bar. Make sure they're not cracked, broke, missing bolts, properly mounted and secured. Then we have the U-bolts. Make sure properly mounted, secured. Then we're going to check our shock absorber, which is on inner side of the trailer. Make sure there's no crack, broke, missing bolts, properly mounted. The bushings are mounted too as well, and there's no leaks due to the compressed gas. And we're going to check our airbag and an airbag mount, which is right behind the leaf springs, and make sure there's no leaks and they're properly mounted and secured. Next thing we're going to check, I believe I've missed the lift spring, so right now is the moment. If you do miss components, you can always go back and add it. I've missed the lift spring, so I'm going to check it, make sure there's no missing lifts and then no crack, broke, or damage. That completes the suspension. Next thing, I'm going to check my brake system. We'll check the air lines. You can probably see it better on the other end. Air lines and hoses. Make sure properly mounted, secure, clamps are tight to the brake chamber. Make sure there's no crack, broke, or damage, and it has a good C-clamp around it. And on the other side, you can actually see the push rod and the slack adjuster right next to it. Make sure it's 1 inch of a plate, good condition. 1 and 2 needs to be adjusted, and more than 2 is out of service. Moving on to tires. Actually, we're missing the brake shoes and the brake drums. Make sure the brake shoes or pads no less than 1/4 inch of thickness, no grease, no oil. And then the brake drum, make sure properly mounted, secure, no discoloration, and no grease, no oil. All right, now we move into the tires. So we're gonna check inner and outer tire. No ABC method, no abrasion, bruises, or cuts. At least 232 on a thread of the tire, and then it's between 110 psi. Make sure there's no debris between the tires, and there is no space between the rims. That indicates they're loose. Next thing, we're gonna go on the outside of the trailer axle. We're gonna check the inner and outer rim. Make sure there's no space between the rims and tires, and there's no leaks, of course. Make sure there's no legal welds, properly mounted, secured. And we're gonna check lug nuts. Make sure that they're tight and secured, and they're visible too. Make sure the hub seal, the trail hub oil seal of the trailer has bolts properly mounted, and then is in proper level. Then we'll check it, remove the cap, we'll stick the finger. If we need oil, we add 90 weight gear oil. Next thing we're gonna check, it's an air valve right there. Make sure the cap is present and there's no leaks. All right, continue with the mud flaps. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. The bolts are not missing, and the mud flap is between 6 to 8 inch of the ground. So moving on to the rear axle of the trailer. I'm gonna check the same way I've checked the front axle, no details. Continue on with the DOT tape and reflectors, white and red present. This is our ABS light, anti-brake system light. Make sure it's amber in color, no moisture, and good rubber seal around it. It works properly. This is our clearance light, red in color, Make sure there's no crack, roll damage or missing bolts, and a good rubber seal that indicates how wide the trailer is. And then we're gonna continue on at this moment with the rear of the trailer. Top down, we have a duty tape across, white and red color present. Then we're gonna continue with trailer tail lights on both sides. Make sure they're red in color. Good rubber seal, no crack, broke, or damage. It has 4 functions: park, brake, turn, forward flash turn. Next thing, we're going to check our ID lights that indicates the height of the trailer. Make sure they're red in color, no crack, broke, or damage, no missing bolts, and works properly, and with good rubber seal, no moisture in it. Next thing, we're going to check our plate light. Make sure it's clear in color and works properly. And next thing, we're going to check our plate and make sure it's up to date. Next thing we'll do check is trailer duty bumper. Make sure it's properly mounted and secure, no crack, broke, or damage, and the duty tape is white and red present. We're going to check also mud flaps on both sides. Make sure there's no crack, broke, or damage, and it should be no more between 6 and 8 inches of the ground. So lastly, we're going to check the right side of the trailer the same way we've done with the left side. We don't go into details. And with this, we conclude our pre-trip inspection. I hope that works for you guys, and good luck to your test. Thank you for watching. All right, this is Mario Guranov again with BG Truck Enterprise. So we're gonna perform in-cab pre-trip inspection. We have a 2011 International Transstar. First thing, what I usually do, I prepare the key and I'll slide the ignition. That way it's kind of ready for us to start it. So we're gonna check first the seat, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, adjusted for my body. Then I'm gonna check the seat belt, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, open and close properly. There's no cuts, in good condition. Next thing, we're gonna check our door area, make sure open and close properly. The mirrors are adjusted for my vision and no crack, broke, or damaged. Next thing, we're gonna check the windshield, make sure there's no Lego sticker to block our vision. And we're gonna check our rubber seal, make sure there is no leaks around it. Next thing, we're gonna check our dashboard, make sure there's no crack, broke, or damage, no missing bolts, properly mounted. We're gonna check our gear shifter, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. At this point, we're gonna start the vehicle. We're gonna turn the key, wait for the lights to go off to warm up the glow plugs. So once you start the vehicle, we're gonna first thing you do, you want to check your oil gauge. Make sure the gauge is rising between 40 and 60 and it works properly. Next thing, you want to check your water gauge. Make sure it's rising between 100 and 170. It works properly. Next thing, you want to check your RPM gauge. Make sure it's rising at 600 RPM at this moment. Next thing, you want to check your speedometer gauge. Make sure it works properly. Next thing, we're going to check our volt gauge. Make sure the gauge is rising between 12 and 14. We're going to check our fuel gauge. Make sure it works properly. Next thing, we're going to check our air gauge, primary, secondary air. Make sure they rise between 100 and 120. So we're just waiting for them to build some air. We're going to continue with the dashboard. That way you don't bounce back and forth to the different components. So we're going to check our defrost, make sure it's blowing on top, and it does. Next thing, we're going to check our defrost and make sure it blows at the bottom, and it does. Make sure it works properly. Next thing we're going to check is our steering wheel. Make sure it has no more than 2 inches of plate, 20 diameter. Next thing, we're going to check our city horn. And moment, we're gonna perform a tug test. We're gonna check our trailer brake, red button, tractor brake. At this moment it's yellow, it could be different colors. And then we're gonna check the service brake. So to perform the tug test, we're gonna put the vehicle in a drive position, apply the brake, and press drive. At this moment, I'm going to check my trailer brake by releasing my tractor brake. As soon as I remove the foot from the service brake, the truck is not moving. That means my trailer brake works properly. Truck is not moving. Trailer brake works properly. I'm going to apply service brake, and I'm going to check my tractor brake. I'm going to apply tractor brake, release trailer brake. At this moment, if I release the foot from the service brake and the vehicle is not moving, that means my tractor brake works properly. Truck is not moving, tractor brake works properly. Next, I'm going to check my service brake. I'm going to apply the service brake. I will release my tractor brake. The trailer is already released. I'm going to move 5 miles an hour. And as soon as I apply the brake, the vehicle should stop. If it pulls to either side, either right or left, it means my slack adjuster needs to be adjusted. Okay, so I'm going to move 5 miles an hour. I'm going to apply the brake. Truck stops. That does not pull either left or right, so service brake works properly. At this moment, we're going to turn the engine off and we're going to turn the ignition on, and we'll prepare for the lap test. Leaks, alarm, and buttons. For the leaks, we're checking if the vehicle, without any brakes applied, it should not lose no more than 3 psi in 1 minute. I'm gonna time myself. Okay, 1 minute is passed. Next, I'm going to check for leaks with the service brake applied. Should not lose no more than 4 psi with a minute. So I time myself. And there is no indication of leaks. So the leaks there, and it works properly. Next thing, we're going to check alarm. We're gonna apply brakes. We're gonna pump the brakes at 60 psi. We should have a light and alarm. So I have a light and alarm. Audio visual means that it's working properly. Next, I'm going to check my buttons, tractor and trailer brake. I'm gonna fend the brakes between 20 and 40 psi. At this moment, they should pop out. Okay. So applying the service brake, or pump the surface brake. So both tractor and trailer brake popped out. That means my lap test worked properly. And that's how we complete our pre-trip inspection inside the vehicle with the automatic transmission. Thanks for watching, and like the videos. Good luck to your test. Thank you. This is Mario Guranov with BG Truck Enterprise. We're going to perform inside pre-trip inspection with a manual transmission. This is a 2000 Volvo VN67. So the first thing we'll do is have the key and slide in the ignition. A bit prepared for the actual inside pre-trip. Next thing, I'm going to check my seat, make sure it's comfortable, no crack, broke, or damage. No missing bolts, properly mounted. I'm going to check the seat belt, make sure latch and latch properly, and no twist to it. It works properly. Next thing we're going to check is our door area. Make sure the door open and close properly. Check the mirrors, make sure adjusted for my vision. Next thing, we're going to check the windshield, make sure there's no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted, no illegal sticker to block my vision. We're going to check the rubber seal, make sure there's no leaks. Next thing we're going to check is the dashboard, make sure no crack, broke, damage, missing bolts properly mounted. We're going to check the gear shifter, make sure it's in neutral position and no crack, broke, or damage. Also, we're going to check our clutch, make sure there's no excessive play. At this point, we're about to start the vehicle, so we're going to turn the key. and then wait for the light goes off and to warm up the glow plugs. And I'll perform safety start. I'll apply the clutch and then start the vehicle. Release gently, make sure the neutral position. So first thing we're going to check is our oil gauge. Make sure it's rising between 40 and 60, and it does, works properly. I'm going to check my water gauge. Make sure it's rising between 100 and 170, works properly. I'm going to check my volt gauge. Make sure it's rising between 12 and 14. I'm going to check my RPM gauge. Make sure it's rising at 800 RPM, works properly. I'm going to check my speedometer gauge. Make sure it works properly. I'm going to check my fuel gauge. Make sure it works properly. I'm going to check my air gauge, primary and secondary. Make sure it works properly. It's building air between 100 and 120 psi. Next thing I'm going to check the thing on the dashboard. I'm going to check defrost. Make sure it's at the windshield and on top, and it works properly. And I'm going to check my defrost. Make sure at the feet and at the bottom, and it does work properly. And it's blowing. Next thing I'm going to check my steering wheel. Make sure more than 2 inches of plate on 20 diameter. Check my city horn, highway horn, make sure it works properly. And I'm going to check my turn signal, left turn, right turn, work properly. I'm going to check my full wet flasher, make sure they work properly. I'm going to check my lights. I'm going to check the high beam, and it does work, and low beam, they work properly. I'm going to check my windshield wipers, make sure they work properly. At this moment, the truck did already 120 psi, and I'm going to perform a tech test, meaning I'm going to check the trailer brake, tractor brake, service brake. For that reason, I'm going to apply the vehicle in a low gear. I'm going to check my trailer brake by releasing the tractor brake. As soon as I tug on the vehicle and the truck is not moving, that means my trailer brake works properly. Truck is not moving, means my trailer brake works properly. Next, I'm going to check my tractor brake. I'm going to apply tractor brake and release the trailer brake. I'm going to tug it and make sure the vehicle is not moving. Vehicle is not moving, tractor brake works properly. Next, I'm going to check my service brake. I'm going to release the tractor. Trailer is already released. I'll move the vehicle 5 miles an hour. I'm going to apply the service brake. The wheel should not be pulling either right or left. It indicates my slack adjuster is to be adjusted. So I'm moving 5 miles an hour. Apply the service brake. The vehicle stops. It is not pulling. My service brake works properly. At this moment, I'm going to turn the vehicle off. Release the clutch and turn ignition on. About to perform a lap test, leaks, alarms, and buttons. For the leaks, without any brakes applied, tractor trailer service brake, we should not lose no more than 3 psi 1 minute. Time myself, and we don't. And with the service brake, should not lose no more than 4 psi in 1 minute, and I don't. Okay, next thing we're going to do is check our alarm on a fender brakes around 60 psi. I actually have a light and alarm. So I have a low air warning light and a buzzer. Next thing I'm going to check is my buttons, tractor and trailer buttons. They should pop out between 20 and 40 once we fend the brakes. Alright, so both of my tractor trailer brakes are popped out. That means my lap test worked properly, and I'll complete my pre-trip inspection. Thanks for watching, and like us on YouTube.